me ask you a question, and I'm going to give the answer to the question at the end, but let me pose it at the start. Venture capital firms, which specialize in funding and supporting startup companies that are going to really try to change the world, make a lot of money on 2 out of 10 investments. What do you think the world's best venture capitalists do? So if the average venture capital firm makes money on 2 out of 10 investments, what do the world's best venture capital firms look like? I'll come back a little bit later and answer that question, but let me pose that in the back of our mind. What I'd like to talk about this morning is thinking about failure. What is the success and failure rate of your company towards new ventures? And is it too high? Is it too low? What do you think is the right sort of balance across those things? So to give a little bit of background, let's go back to that venture capital story. Why is it 2 out of 10? Why do they only make money on 1 out of the 5 things that they do? Well, the answer is that they're going into very creative, very experimental kind of phases. They're entering in places where there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't really know if the market's going to emerge exactly, but if it does, it's going to be really big. We don't really know if the technology is going to play out the way we're suspecting it might, but if it does, it's going to be huge. And so we're trying to launch a number of initiatives to see which ones are going to work and which ones are not. So for roughly half of the things that they do, so 5 out of those 10 investments, it doesn't work out, and they actually lose almost all their money. Then they have about 3 out of 10 investments where it goes so-so. They get their money back, but it's really not considered to be a success. And then there's some over here where the market works, the technology works. They identify what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and they're able to fund it correctly, and they're able to build it up, and it becomes something very big. And they make so much money on this side of the portfolio that they're able to pay for the losses as well as also the middling results and overall achieve success. So many larger companies are facing a global environment, a dynamic environment that requires them to be able to do new things, become more agile. They may be facing pressure from digitization. They may be facing pressure from overseas competition. It may be that regulatory environments are changing or that the old barriers to entry are crumbling around them. And so they're trying to understand how they can go out and do new businesses, how they can create new ventures. And one sort of common mentality or perception about how to do this is that they want to establish many venture capital firms. They want to, inside their own organization, they want to have the ability to replicate the external success, how to launch a whole bunch of things. They want to have an emerging business opportunities group that just takes them into new areas and creates the platforms for tomorrow. So here's the question. When the rubber hits the road, can your organization have a 2 out of 10 success rate? That's what the average venture capitalist does. Can your organization really support that type of dynamic? To think about that, let me pose a couple of questions. Let me pose, for example, the question of whether if you had a star employee in your organization, someone that had consistently always been moving up, that was sort of someone that people were thinking about could become the next CEO, if you went and asked that person to go lead one of these internal ventures, would they be willing to do it? Or would they come back and say, I don't really think so. I'm actually worried about if this thing fails, and it's likely it's going to fail because it's so risky, it's so uncertain. If this thing fails, then people are not going to be able to know that it was the project that failed versus me. So in other words, I'm worried about that smudge on my resume emerging. Or think about things like how you allocate resources, the budget decisions that your company makes. Is it designed to have a process where you're investing small amounts of money in order to see the initial results and then be able to shut down the things that aren't working and move it over to the things that are working and really put the money behind that? More broadly speaking, does your organization have a culture that supports failure, that supports the ability, if the failure is the right kind of failure, to acknowledge it, to celebrate it, to say, what did we learn from this, and now how can we go and apply the lessons to the things that are working really well for us and power that up? For a lot of organizations, when they candidly think about this, when they do a realistic assessment, one of the things that they realize is that 20% is not the right spot for them. It may be that they have to have a 50% success rate. Some organizations I've worked with even are 80% or higher. Due to cultural reasons, due to regulatory reasons, due to employee morale reasons, due to a number of reasons, maybe they're not able to go support a very high failure rate, but high reward and the success scenarios. Now, why is that important? Let me go back and talk about the world's best venture capital firms. So it turns out you don't become the world's best venture capital firm by making money on 3 out of 10 investments rather than 2 out of 10. If anything, the surprising finding is the world's best venture capital firms actually can make money on fewer investments than the world's average venture capital firm. But the way they do it is special. Because they are able to really test, experiment, try very radical and risky things, but shut down a lot of things that aren't going to work, they can make money on 1 out of 10, but that 1 out of 10 turns out to be Google or Uber, or it turns out to be Facebook. It turns out to be things that change the world and help create billions and billions of dollars of returns for them and returns for the economy and overall. So this ability to test and experiment really affects the types of business that you're undertaking. If you have a culture that can only support a 50% success rate or has to have an 80% success rate, it's fundamental to understand the implications that has for the types of investments that your company can take on. Your company can't take on the very radical portfolio of the world's largest venture capital firms or the most successful venture capital firms because your success rate looks very different from what their success rate looks like. So when I go and work with companies, one of the things we want to start with is understanding, first off, do you know what your success rate is right now for internal ventures? Actually, many companies don't even know that, so that's a first step. The second is a realistic assessment of where are we today, what does the success rate look like, what could our organization support, and do we need to try to take on changes in order to help move that success rate down, to help move that to where we're trying more radical things. We have a culture that supports people doing experiments, having the right kinds of failure, and that we reward people when they make the right kinds of actions that reveal that information to us. The most successful companies are going to be able to find where their organizations should fit on that spectrum and correctly align the types of ventures they're pursuing with the success rate that their company is seeking to enjoy in new venturing concepts. This is the platform for growth for tomorrow, and it helps companies be able to consistently be able to identify what's going to be the new opportunities that can take them to the next level.